the birth of a new nation, the beginning of the Turkish Lira story. Imagine finding an old Turkish banknote hidden somewhere in your family's home. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a piece of paper, a number, a symbol, a forgotten memory from the past. But that small piece of paper carries a much bigger story, a story of wars, struggles, economic decisions, and a nation trying to build a future from almost nothing. Because the story of the Turkish lira is not only the story of a currency, it is the story of modern Turkey itself. When the Republic of Turkey was founded in 1923, the country had finally achieved political independence. But economic independence was a completely different challenge. Years of war had left the country exhausted. Many cities and infrastructure projects had been damaged. Industry was extremely limited. Most people lived from agriculture, using traditional methods that had changed very little over generations. Turkey had a new flag, a new government, a new future. But economically, it had to start almost from zero. The new leaders understood something very important. A country cannot be truly independent without a strong economy, so they began building the foundations of a new system. Factories were established, railways were expanded, state-owned companies were created to produce goods that Turkey previously had to buy from other countries. The goal was not only to grow, the goal was to survive. But Turkey faced a difficult reality. The economy depended heavily on agriculture. Products like tobacco, cotton, hazelnuts, and dried fruits were sold abroad to earn foreign currency. With that money, Turkey bought machines, technology, and industrial equipment from other countries. The system worked, but it was fragile. Because whenever exports became weaker, the country had less foreign currency. And when foreign currency became scarce, the economy started feeling pressure. Then, in 1929, the world faced one of the biggest economic disasters in history, the Great Depression. A crisis that started in the United States quickly spread around the world. Global trade slowed down, prices of agricultural products fell. Countries that depended on exports suddenly earned much less money. Turkey was one of them. The country began facing a problem that would appear many times throughout its history. It needed foreign currency, but it did not have enough. In response, Turkey increased the role of the state in the economy. The government started protecting domestic industries and planning economic development more actively. For a while, this helped create stability. But one major challenge remained. Turkey needed to produce more. More factories, more technology, more exports. Because without stronger production, the country would always depend on money coming from outside. And this would become the beginning of a cycle that shaped Turkey's economic history for decades. A country trying to grow, but constantly needing foreign currency to support that growth. A challenge that would return again and again, through economic booms, through crises, and through some of the most difficult moments in the history of the Turkish lira. Growth, hope, and hidden problems. The years of expansion and the beginning of dependency. After the difficult years of building a new country, Turkey entered a period of change. The 1950s brought new hope. The world was recovering after the Second World War, and many countries were entering a new era of growth. Turkey was also changing. New roads were built. Agriculture became more modern. Thousands of tractors entered farms. Production increased. For many people, this period felt like the beginning of a better future. The country was growing, but behind this growth, another story was quietly developing. Much of Turkey's development depended on things it had to buy from abroad. The machines used in factories, the fuel needed for transportation, the technology needed for modernization, all required foreign currency. Turkey was growing faster, but it still needed dollars to keep that growth moving. And this created a problem that would follow the country for many years. The economy was becoming dependent on outside resources. During this period, Turkey tried to build its own industries. The idea was simple. Instead of importing everything from other countries, Turkey would produce more things itself. Factories expanded, domestic industries grew. Products made in Turkey became more common. This created jobs and helped cities develop. But producing locally did not mean becoming completely independent. Many factories still needed imported machines, energy, and raw materials. Every new investment created a new need for foreign currency. As the economy expanded, Turkey faced a difficult choice: slow down growth or borrow money to continue. Like many developing countries, Turkey chose borrowing. Foreign loans helped build infrastructure. They supported industrial growth. They allowed the country to continue expanding. For a while, it seemed like the right decision. But borrowing creates a responsibility, because every loan eventually has to be paid back. And when a country earns less foreign currency than it needs, debt can become a growing problem. Then came the 1970s. A global energy crisis changed everything. Oil prices suddenly increased around the world. For countries producing oil, this created huge profits. But for countries that imported energy, it became a major burden. Turkey was one of those countries. The cost of energy increased. Factories became more expensive to operate. Transportation costs rose, and the country needed more foreign currency than before. Soon, ordinary people began feeling the effects. Prices started rising faster. The Turkish lira began losing value. Businesses struggled to plan for the future. Families watched their savings become weaker. The economic problems were no longer only numbers on paper. They were becoming part of everyday life. By the end of the 1970s, Turkey was facing a difficult reality. The old economic model was reaching its limits. The country needed change. It needed a new approach. And in 1980, Turkey made one of the biggest economic decisions in its history. It decided to open its economy to the world. A new chapter was about to begin, one that would bring new opportunities, but also new risks. Opening to the world. The rise of global markets and the debt cycle. By the beginning of the 1980s, Turkey had reached a turning point. The old economic system was struggling. The country needed more foreign currency. Inflation was rising, and the economy was becoming harder to manage. Turkey needed a new direction. So in 1980, it made one of the biggest economic changes in its history. It decided to open its economy to the world. Before this period, Turkey had followed a more protected economic model. The government played a large role. Domestic industries were protected from foreign competition. The idea was to build strong industries inside the country. But over time, this system became difficult to maintain. Turkey needed more investment, more exports, and more connection with the global economy. The reforms of 1980 changed the way Turkey approached economics. The country began encouraging exports. Imports became easier. Private companies gained more importance. Turkey wanted to become a stronger player in international markets. The goal was simple: produce more, sell more abroad, earn more foreign currency, and reduce dependence on outside financing. At first, the results looked promising. Turkish companies started reaching new markets. Exports increased, the economy became more dynamic. Cities grew. New businesses appeared, but opening an economy also meant accepting new risks. Because global money moves quickly, when investors trust a country, money flows in. But when confidence disappears, money can leave just as quickly, and Turkey would experience this many times. During the 1980s and 1990s, another problem became larger. Government spending was often higher than government income. To cover the difference, the state borrowed money. At first, borrowing helped the economy continue, but over time, debt started creating pressure. Old debts needed to be paid with new borrowing. Interest costs increased, and the economy became trapped in a cycle. Borrow more to pay what was borrowed before. As the 1990s continued, people began losing confidence. Inflation became part of daily life. Prices changed constantly. Saving money in Turkish lira became more difficult. Many people turned to foreign currencies and gold to protect their savings. Because when people stop trusting their own money, they start searching for alternatives. In 1994, the pressure finally turned into a major crisis. Investors became worried about Turkey's ability to manage its debts. Money started leaving the country. Demand for foreign currency increased, and the Turkish lira lost a large part of its value. The crisis showed something important. A currency is not only affected by economic numbers, it is affected by confidence. But the biggest challenge was still ahead. By the end of the 1990s, Turkey was facing several problems at the same time: a fragile banking system, high public debt, political uncertainty, and an economy that depended heavily on foreign financing. Then, in 2001, the system collapsed. The 2001 economic crisis became one of the deepest crises in Turkey's history. Banks failed, companies closed, unemployment increased, the Turkish lira lost significant value. Millions of people felt the impact. A crisis that started in financial markets quickly reached everyday life. But from this crisis came a major transformation. Turkey began rebuilding its financial system. Banks were restructured. New economic rules were introduced. The foundations of a more stable economy were created. And slowly, confidence began to return. The years after 2001 would become a completely different chapter. Turkey would experience rapid growth. Inflation would fall. Foreign investment would increase. For a while, it seemed like the country had finally escaped its old economic problems. But one important question remained. Was Turkey creating a stronger economy, or was it entering another period of growth built on foreign money? The recovery years. Growth, stability, and the hidden weakness. After the crisis of 2001, Turkey was at a breaking point. The economy had suffered a major collapse. People had lost trust. Businesses had struggled. The Turkish lira had lost a significant amount of its value. But sometimes, the biggest crises create the biggest changes. And after 2001, Turkey began rebuilding its economy from the ground up. One of the first major steps was reform. The banking system was strengthened. Weak banks were closed or reorganized. New financial rules were introduced. The goal was simple: prevent the same problems from happening again. And slowly, the results started to appear. Inflation began to fall. Interest rates declined. Confidence returned. A country that had been known for economic instability was now becoming one of the fastest-growing emerging markets. In 2005, Turkey made another symbolic change. It removed 6 zeros from its currency. 1 million old Turkish lira became one new Turkish lira. This was not only a technical decision, it was a psychological one. For years, the Turkish lira had been associated with huge numbers and losing value. Removing the zeros sent a message. A new economic era was beginning. During this period, Turkey experienced strong growth. Foreign companies invested in the country. Construction expanded, infrastructure improved, new businesses were created, credit became easier to access. Many people experienced rising incomes and better living standards. For a while, Turkey was seen as an economic success story. A country that had suffered repeated crises finally seemed to have found stability. But every success story has another side, and beneath the growth, an old challenge was still there: foreign currency. Turkey's economy was growing quickly, but much of that growth depended on money coming from outside the country. Foreign investors provided capital, banks provided loans, companies borrowed to expand. This helped the economy grow faster, but it also created a vulnerability, because borrowed money eventually has to be paid back. Another challenge was Turkey's dependence on imports. As the economy expanded, people and businesses demanded more goods. Factories needed machinery, the country needed energy, consumers wanted more products. But many of these things were purchased from abroad. This meant Turkey continued needing large amounts of foreign currency. The economy was growing, but it still depended on a steady flow of outside money. Then came the global financial crisis of 2008. Around the world, banks collapsed and economies slowed. Turkey was affected too. Exports declined, investment slowed, growth weakened. But compared to previous crises, Turkey's financial system was stronger. The reforms after 2001 helped the country recover faster. This strengthened the belief that Turkey had entered a new and more stable period. By the early 2010s, the picture looked very different from the past. Inflation was much lower, the economy was larger, infrastructure had improved, Turkey had become an important emerging market. But a question remained. What would happen if global money stopped flowing? Because Turkey's growth depended heavily on international investment. And when the world economy changed, that dependence would become a serious challenge. The era of easy money was coming to an end. Global interest rates began changing. Investors became more careful. Money started moving away from riskier markets. And countries that depended heavily on foreign financing began feeling pressure. Turkey was one of them. The next chapter would become the most difficult period for the Turkish lira. The fall of the Turkish lira. The return of old problems. For a while, Turkey looked like it had finally escaped its old economic struggles. The economy was growing. Inflation was much lower than before. Foreign investors were interested. The Turkish lira appeared more stable. But beneath this success, some old problems were still waiting. Turkey was still highly dependent on foreign money. And when global conditions changed, the pressure returned. The first major warning came in 2013. For years, many countries had benefited from cheap money around the world. Investors were searching for higher returns. Emerging markets like Turkey attracted large amounts of foreign capital. But then, the United States began changing its monetary policy. Interest rates started moving higher. The message was clear. The era of easy money was ending. When global investors become more cautious, money often leaves developing countries first. And when foreign money leaves, currencies feel the pressure. Demand for the local currency decreases. Demand for foreign currencies increases. And the exchange rate begins to rise. This is exactly what started happening with the Turkish lira. But the problem was not only global. Turkey also had deeper economic challenges. The country imported more than it exported. Energy costs remained high. Many businesses had debts in foreign currencies, and when the lira lost value, those debts became more expensive. A weaker currency created higher costs. Higher costs created higher prices, and higher prices created more pressure on the currency. Then came 2018. The Turkish lira experienced a sharp decline. Confidence weakened. Investors became more cautious. Businesses faced rising costs, and inflation increased. For ordinary people, this was not just a financial headline. It affected daily life. Food became more expensive. Energy costs increased. Savings lost purchasing power. The value of money became a personal concern for millions of people. Then, in 2020, the world faced another major shock. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted global economies. Factories stopped. Supply chains broke. Governments around the world spent heavily to support their economies. For a short time, money became easier to access. But when the world reopened, a new problem appeared: inflation. Countries around the world began fighting rising prices. Central banks increased interest rates. Investors started looking for safer places to keep their money. Again, countries with economic vulnerabilities faced more pressure. Turkey was among them. As inflation continued, people began changing how they protected their savings. Some preferred foreign currencies. Some bought gold. Others avoided keeping large amounts of money in Turkish lira. This created a difficult cycle. When people lose confidence in a currency, they try to escape from it. And when more people escape from a currency, its value can fall even further. Turkey introduced new policies to slow this process. One example was the currency-protected deposit system. The goal was to encourage people to keep their savings in Turkish lira by protecting them against exchange rate changes. But the deeper challenge remained: restoring confidence. Because a currency is not supported only by policies. It is supported by belief. People need to believe their money will still have value tomorrow. The story of the Turkish lira is not simply about one crisis. It is about a repeating challenge. How can a country grow while reducing its dependence on foreign money? How can it produce enough value to support its own currency? And how can it create long-term trust? Because in the end, a currency is more than a number on a screen. It represents confidence in a country's future. And when that confidence weakens, the currency is often the first place where people see the consequences, what money really represents. The real reason behind a currency's strength. After looking at a century of Turkey's economic journey, one question remains: why do currencies lose their value? Why does some money become stronger over time, while other currencies continue to decline? The answer is not a single event. A currency does not lose value because of one crisis, one decision, or one person. It is the result of many years of economic choices. At its core, money is built on one thing: trust. A banknote is just paper. A number in a bank account is just a digital record. What gives money value is the belief that it will still have value tomorrow. People trust that they can use it. Businesses trust that they can invest with it. And investors trust that the economy behind it is stable. When that trust becomes weaker, the currency becomes weaker too. One of the biggest enemies of a currency is inflation. A little inflation can be normal in a growing economy. But when prices rise too quickly for too long, people begin losing confidence. The money they saved yesterday buys less tomorrow. The same amount of income provides fewer opportunities. Slowly, people feel the value of their money disappearing. Another important factor is production. A strong currency is usually supported by a strong economy. Countries with advanced industries, technology, and high productivity create more value. They export more, they attract investment. They generate confidence. A country cannot build a strong currency only by printing more money. Real economic strength comes from what a country produces. Foreign currency is another important part of the story. Countries trade with the world. They buy energy, machines, technology, and raw materials. But these payments are often made in major currencies like the dollar or euro. If a country constantly needs more foreign currency than it earns, pressure builds on its own currency. This has been one of Turkey's biggest economic challenges throughout history. Debt is not always a bad thing. Every successful economy uses borrowing. Companies borrow to build factories. Governments borrow to invest in infrastructure. But debt becomes a problem when borrowing replaces growth. If borrowed money creates more production and more exports, it can strengthen an economy. But if borrowed money only delays problems, the pressure eventually returns. So, why are some currencies considered strong? Why do people trust currencies like the US dollar or the Swiss franc? Because behind those currencies are systems built on confidence, strong institutions, stable financial markets, high productivity, advanced technology, and a belief that the future will remain stable. The story of the Turkish lira is not only a story of decline, it is also a story of transformation. Turkey moved from a mostly agricultural economy to a much more industrial and connected economy. It survived wars, global crises, financial shocks, and difficult economic periods. It also experienced moments of impressive growth and progress. But throughout this journey, one challenge remained: building an economy strong enough to support its own currency. Because a nation's currency is not just a piece of paper, it is a reflection of the country behind it. It represents the factories that produce, the people who create, the institutions people trust, and the expectations of the future. The history of the Turkish lira teaches one simple lesson. A strong currency is not created overnight. It is built slowly through stability, productivity, and trust. Because money is more than value. Money is a promise that tomorrow will be worth investing in, and when a nation strengthens that promise, its currency becomes stronger with it.